Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to National City Christian Church for our weekly Music at Midday recital. My name is Mike McMahon. Very happy to welcome all of you here, especially those who may be here for the very first time. I hope you enjoy hearing the wonderful pipe organ we have here in the front, but also the wonderful organ we have in the back. The two organs, although they are independent of one another, they do function together and are playable from this front console. If you'd like to find out more about the organ, you're welcome to come up after the recital, not only to speak with Alex, but also to check out the console and see all the options the organist has at their disposal. If you'd like also to check out the displays in the back, you can learn some more. There are lots of information back there and photographs that describe the art of pipe organ building and tells you a little more about this organ here at National City Christian Church. We would love to have you on our email list, so if you're not currently receiving notices of our recitals, and that's all we send you, you can just write down your name and your email address on a piece of paper. We have some forms actually in the front and the back that you can use for that purpose. This series is self-supporting, which means that we rely on you to help us keep it going. So if you're able to make a donation by cash or check, you can use collection plates that are found here at the front and in the back of the sanctuary, or you can go online and make a donation at nationalcitycc.org. We're very happy today to be welcoming Alex Jones, and he has a wonderful program prepared for us today, so I know you're going to enjoy it very much. So without any further delay, please help me welcome Alex Jones.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to National City Christian. It's been a pleasure to get to know this instrument. Certainly, like the size of it, when I first sat down to it, I was like, oh gosh, there's a lot of organ here. How am I going to get through all of it? But it's wonderful to see you, and it's a great pleasure to play here. Even though my wife is an American citizen, this is my first time in Washington, D.C., and I've really enjoyed the brief time that I've had today and yesterday while I was rehearsing. So it's really, really great to be here, and I hope you enjoyed this afternoon's program. I've tried to sort of program as eclectically as I can, given that this organ is capable of so many things and so many different styles of music. I'm going to just, if I may, swap the next two items on the program. You'll see that next, as printed, we have the Bach Prelude and Fugue, and then a piece by Billy Strayhorn. And I'm actually going to swap those two around, if that's okay with you, because I think it might be easier to have something soft followed by something loud, especially since I've just used the big party horn in the back, so you should be all awake by now after that. So this next piece, when Michael and I were having our conversations about arranging today's recital, he said to me, I hear you're a theatre organist as well. Is there any chance you could play anything theatrical? So I sort of scratched my head for a little bit and thought, well, what can I pull together on what is predominantly a classical organ, and can I make it sound maybe not quite like a Wurlitzer, but something similar? And so I decided to make an arrangement of this next piece by Billy Strayhorn, one of the most remarkable jazz standards and ballads probably ever written. And it has probably my favorite lyrics of any jazz standard ever written. And if you'll indulge me, I'll see if I can remember how they go, because it really is poetry. And considering that Strayhorn actually wrote this when he was 18, I think this is an amazing piece of music and poetry. So the lyrics are something along the lines of, I used to visit all the very grey places, those come-what-may places, where one relaxes on the axis of the wheel of life to get the feel of life from jazz and cocktails. The girls I knew had sad and sullen grey faces with distingué traces that used to be there, and you could see where they'd been washed away by too many through the day 12 o'clock tales. Then you came along with your siren song to tempt me to madness. I thought for a while that your poignant smile was tinged with the sadness of a great love for me. Ah, yes, I was wrong. Life is lonely again. A trough full of hearts could only be a bore. A week in Paris might ease the bite of it. Why should I care for naught in spite of it? I'll forget you, I will, while you are still burning inside my brain. Romance is mush, stifling those who strive. I'll live a lush life in some small dive, and there I'll be while I rot with the rest of those whose lives are lonely too. So this is a really amazing piece of music, which I think you'll agree works very effectively here, and I hope you enjoy it. Billy Strayhorn's remarkable Lush Life. I love that. If you're ever interested, listen to Nat King Cole's recording of that on YouTube. It's completely seminal what he does with it. And actually, it's interesting because I searched for ages to see if Frank Sinatra had recorded it. And a friend of mine who was in the know said, well, he tried to, but the song was so complicated harmonically, he gave up. So we never have a recording of Sinatra singing that piece, but it's just glorious stuff all the same. So moving back to 18th century Germany for this next selection, I had to program some Bach, and I've been working on this Prelude and Fugue in E minor for a little while, and of all of the major preludes and fugues that Bach wrote for the organ, I would say that easily this one is the most outrageous and the most adventurous, because certainly in the fugue it seems as though he starts in a fairly conventional manner, though with a highly chromatic and practically unsingable subject. Because it starts on a single note, E, and then it splits outwards chromatically, which is why this piece is often nicknamed as the wedge, Prelude and Fugue. And then it carries on in sort of fairly conventional contrapuntal style, and then at the first cadence, Bach says, we're not going to carry on with that anymore, and I'm just going to give you a completely new idea, and we're going to destroy the form of the piece before then carrying back on into the fugue. And he wrote this later on in his life when he was in Leipzig, and it's rumored that this piece premiered at the Pauluskirche in Leipzig, which was also at that time known as the University Church. And so the theory is Bach wrote this more sort of contrapuntally complex work because he would have known that the scholars and the bigwigs at the university would have appreciated something sort of more intellectually stimulating, let's say. So I hope you enjoy this, Bach's great wedge Prelude and Fugue in E minor. That piece feels like playing a symphony, honestly. It's very involved and remarkable. I just love it. All right, well, we're coming to the final two selections on this afternoon's program. Thank you all very much again for coming. It's been a pleasure to share music with you this afternoon. My final two selections come from the pen of Maurice Duruflé, one of the most influential and important composers for the organ. He was French and he lived in the early 20th century. And these two selections come from his suite, Opus 5, for organ, written in about 1936 or so, and intended really for secular concert use. The middle movement is the Sicilienne. This is really, I think, about as close as organists come in terms of original repertoire to the music of Claude Debussy or Maurice Ravel. It's very impressionistic, and this Sicilienne really reminds me of sort of, a nighttime landscape, or you could perhaps picture Vincent van Gogh's Stars at Night. It's very evocative and uses many of the interesting soft and solo colours of the organ, clarinet, oboe, strings, etc. So you'll get a good tour of this organ's softer capabilities. And then I'll finish with the final movement from the suite, the treacherous Toccata. This is really a very scary piece to play, never mind in public, but I'm going to do my best with it. It's a fantastic sort of tour de force, and is, although Duruflé, interestingly, himself hated it and never recorded it, but I don't know, I'm not convinced by his argument. I think it's an amazing piece of work. So I hope you enjoyed these last two selections from Maurice Duruflé. Thank you all very much again for coming, and I look forward to talking to as many of you as I can afterwards. Have a good afternoon.